In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to add cool acrylic artwork to your lights. So a really cool way to elevate your builds is to add in some acrylic work, and this is where a laser cutter really comes in handy. There's a lot of stuff that you can do, and as you get more and more comfortable with the laser, you'll start to find more and more projects that you can do with that to elevate your builds. And one area that I've liked to work with is acrylic design. So if somebody has an idea for like a picture or something like that, many times you can simplify that picture, or you could find something that matches a theme that you might be going on with the lights, and you can use that in the acrylic work that you're doing. Now, the process to do that isn't too hard, but I've played around with it a lot over the years, so I figured I would share some of the stuff that I've come across that works, some of the newer tricks that I've learned recently as well, and just show you how I would go about using that on one of my lasers here in the shop. I'm primarily going to be focusing on the actual artwork part on a computer in this video. As far as actually getting the sizing right and figuring out how to put the acrylic plates in, that'll be for another video. That way we can kind of keep this one just focused on the actual computer design part. First thing you need to do is decide on a theme, or decide on what kind of design you're going for. In this case, I'm actually going to be doing this for a airlift panel cover. So this will also cover that video as well, but this does also relate to headlights themselves and creating panels and unique designs that you can add in, especially on big themed builds and things like that. I've used these techniques many times before in the past for big themed builds like Star Wars, Batman, stuff like that. Always keep in mind that licensing is a little bit of a gray area when it comes to this stuff. So you definitely want to be careful as to what designs you're choosing and where you're putting them in. And when possible, try to find royalty-free designs to avoid any potential for lawsuits or anything like that that could happen. In general, I haven't heard of this being an issue, but if possible, protect yourself when you can. So one place that I like to go to when I'm trying to look for an image is Google. So when you pull up Google, you have your search bar, and you can search for any kind of image that you want to use. So in this case, let's go with the skull. Ultimately, what you're going to be trying to do is create a vector. So you can search for a skull vector, and that will kind of limit what you end up finding. If you just search for skull, I'm going to go to images here at the top, and it's just going to populate a whole bunch of images. Now, these are not going to really be ideal for laser etching. Think of it almost like a vinyl decal. Like this one here is a little bit more along the lines of what we're looking for, but the detail's a little bit low. Maybe I want something a little bit more detailed, or depending on what image you're looking for, you may not even be able to find something that simple in a vector style. So you can help to scale it down if you search for vectors. Sometimes you'll see vectors pop up right up here, like this one here. I can hit, it'll take me to different vectors, and that'll get you a little bit closer. Now, like an image like this is actually potentially possible that you could do, and we can play with that one there and see if we can get it. That's pushing your limits of what you can do, and the laser cutter itself and the definition that it has is going to vary a little bit. I have two laser cutters myself right now. I have a Glowforge Pro, and then I have the BMO by Flux. And I like them both. They're really good lasers. The BMO is about a 30 watt and the Glowforge is a 45 watt laser. The Glowforge seems to have a little bit more definition, which is really nice. So this might actually be a good case to take a file like this one and try to see if we can etch it on the plate. Now keep in mind that this one is copyrighted, so I can't sell this. This is just for demonstration purposes only. I'm not going to be shipping this to anybody, and you definitely want to keep that in mind if you are going to be using these images to make money. Be careful with that. Try to find royalty-free or pay for the licensing if possible, but ultimately it's up to you how you want to go about that. So we'll go ahead and pull up the image here. You'll see it pop up on the side over here. What I can do is I can left-click on that, and I can just do Save Image As. Now you just want to have a folder that you're going to save this to. It could be your project folder for whatever build you're doing, or wherever. It doesn't really matter. Go ahead and give it a name, and we'll go ahead and save it. So now we want to turn this JPEG into a vector, and there's a few different ways that you can go about it, but the way that I have found that works really well is Inkscape. And this is free. You can get this online. I'll try to remember to put a link in the bottom of this video so that you can find it easily. But it's a pretty good software. They do update it periodically, so like, you know, a year ago it didn't look quite like this. So it changes a little bit, but you know, hopefully it looks somewhat similar to this at the time that you're watching this video. First thing we want to do is open up our file. So as you can see, we loaded up the file. The quality is a little bit lower on this image. If you can find something with a higher resolution image, that'll be better. I think this was like 370 by 370, so it's really low resolution. Larger resolution is going to do a little bit better, but that's kind of the cool thing about vectors, is that when you take this Inkscape software, you can actually create a high resolution vector from this with a couple clicks. So in this case here, I've loaded up the image. I'm going to click on it. And what I'm using here is the trace bitmap tool, which will pop right up on the side here. And you do have a couple sliders and stuff. You can see kind of where mine is, threshold. I'm mostly doing defaults here, and it works pretty good. But you can fine tune it a little bit depending on your picture and what you're using to try to get it right. They do have a live preview page here of what it's going to actually clip. But as you can see there, I just have that loaded up on the defaults, and I'm going to hit apply down here at the bottom. And that is going to create a vector image from that. Now, we need to get rid of the original image so that we can save the vector. So I'm just going to move that vector out of the way, click on the background, and hit delete. And that's going to delete the original image, and we're left with a vector. Now, this is something that you could theoretically cut out with a vinyl sticker. That's basically what you're trying to get to, is a image where it's either full black or nothing, so you have hard lines, hard edges that you can work with. And when you're working with a laser, it's actually works a little bit better than a vinyl cutter. If you were trying to cut this out with vinyl, you might want to go back and fine tune it a little bit, cut out some areas like, this little spot on his head here. That's a little bit of unnecessary weeding that you may not want to go through. Some of these sharper, smaller areas are going to be a little bit difficult to try to weed out of vinyl. But in this case, we're going to be doing it a different process with the acrylic work. So I think the image as is, actually, we can work with pretty good. So I'm going to take that image as is. We're going to go ahead and save it as, and you can see down here at the bottom, Inkscape SVG. So that is a vector. SVG, skull, we'll keep it in our folder here. We're going to hit save, and now we have just created a vector. So now we're going to move over to our laser cutting software, and that's going to greatly depend on the laser that you're using. Probably one of the most popular softwares out there for laser cutters is Lightburn, but in the case of both of my laser cutters, I actually have dedicated software. So Glowforge has its own web-based software, and then BMO has its own application that you use for the laser operation. So in this case, I'm going to be using the Glowforge, and I have it pulled up here. You can see here I've already got the outline of the airlift plate on the screen because this is my profile for airlift plate creation. But if you are watching this video for the airlift, it's pretty easy. If you download the files that are in my airlift video, I will put a link in the bottom of this one as well for those. You're going to download those files and you can use them here. Now you can see in those files I do include vectors. So you can take that vector, in this case I'm doing the large airlift plate. You got the large one, you got the small one, and then you have the back plates where it will go around the LEDs. So I'm going to load up the large one here. I'm going to hit open, and now it's going to bring in that vector. Now the vector is going to be whatever random size it decides to put on here. In this case, I am going to resize that down. Now as you can see in the sizing for this one here, if I go up in the top corner for the ruler, my sizing is 4.28 by 2.302. And that would be effectively the size that I would want to take this down to. So just like that, I've resized it to the size that I need. And we're not going to be doing an engrave. So in the case, and once again, this is the Glowforge. It's going to be different on whatever software you're using. There's countless videos out there to show you how to use the software differently, but I'm going to show you on the Glowforge. We can go ahead and change this one from engrave to cut, and that will actually cut an outline rather than removing all the material. It would just cut around the material. So in most laser cutting software, you have the choice of either engraving or cutting, and we're going to be doing a little bit of both of that. For the image, we're going to be doing engraving, and for the plate itself, we're going to do the cutting. That way you have, when it's all finished, you have a plate with your image on it, and it should work out pretty good. So that is the part for actually bringing in your file here, and you can do this on a lot of stuff. And once again, I'll go into more detail on the actual plate creation and figuring out your sizing if you're using this for a headlight or using it for something else. I'll do another video in the future going over the getting that size down, getting it into the computer, measuring it, creating a vector, moving it into your software, and figuring all that out. But for now, we're just going to go based on on the premise that you already know that, you've already got that set, and we're going to build from there. So the next thing we're going to do is very similarly, we're going to go ahead and upload, but this time we're going to upload our skull vector, the one that we created. So you can see the skull vector came in like that, and we can rescale that. We'll just put it in place there. And now for this one, you do want to check your material. As far as the Glowforge goes, it does seem to be pretty defined software. When I'm using the BMO, it's a little bit less so, so I actually have to set the settings manually. The software itself doesn't calculate based on the material you're using. That's one thing that I do kind of like about the Glowforge. It does seem to help you get a little bit closer to the proper settings depending on the material that you're using, versus the BMO software. It's a little bit more of like a drop-down profile, and you choose the profile for what you're using, and then from there you can tweak it and create your own profile. So kind of the similar idea, just a different process to go about it. I'll be honest, I haven't used image burn myself, so I don't know a ton about it, but once again, there's a ton of videos out there that'll show that in more detail if that is something that you're using. So once you've chosen the material that you're going to use, you're going to want to set the settings that you're going to use for that material. So in this case, the engrave, I have a choice between draft, SD, and HD. I've also got a couple custom profiles that I've created there, but I'm just going to go with the HD on this one. And these are presets here, which you can modify as you play around with your laser and see what works well. A lot of this is based on using Glowforge's actual materials. If you're not using their materials, then you're going to have to tweak this a little bit, but I find that most of the time this is actually pretty close. So as you can see, draft, it's faster at about almost 1,000 speed and full power. SD is a little bit slower, 544, and less power at 70, so it just goes a little bit slower across there. And then HD is the slowest at 300 with the lowest power at 16. And a lot of this comes down to the slower the laser is moving, the more accurate it will be. So if you're trying to go extremely detailed, HD is going to get you a better image. So in this case, I'm going to go with that. If you're trying to get it done real quick, maybe you just want to do a mock-up real quick to see how it's going to look, you could do a draft, and that'll get you there. And then for the final product, maybe you go back and do an HD. But in this case, I'm just going to go with HD, and we'll see how it turns out. And if need be, I can always go back and change and tweak things. Alright, so I put some material in the laser cutter, and you can see it does automatically show up here. And once again, this is Glowforge. Whatever you're using, you may not even have a camera. I know I have kind of stressed this in the past on other videos. When you're choosing a laser, you know, this is a lot of stuff to consider. In the case of the laser cutters that I have, they both have cameras. Now, the cameras function differently. With the Glowforge, you have one central camera that takes a picture of the entire board, and it can be inaccurate at times, so that's something to consider. Versus the BMO, it actually takes images across the board, and the head moves back and forth. And in that case, it can be a little bit more accurate. So, like, if I am doing laser etching on lenses, I much prefer the BMO, primarily because the camera is far more accurate. Whereas with this, I can get pretty darn close, but I find that the Glowforge can sometimes be off by a couple millimeters, and in the case of something like lens etching, that is not good. Even the BMO is not like 100% accurate, but it's better than this. And I know a lot of them, like OhmTech is one that the cheap ones that are like under $1,000 generally don't include cameras at all. So trying to get that lined up is gonna be difficult. I don't have one, I haven't used one myself, but I can't imagine trying to do stuff like this without a camera would be easy. It's definitely something to consider. Glowforge is not cheap. I will say this, I got mine used. It had a bad power wire for the laser, so I picked it up locally on Facebook Marketplace for about $500. I ended up having to do a little bit of research online and found out what the issue was. I attempted the patch using shrink tubing and liquid electrical tape. That didn't work for too long, a couple months before I started having issues again, so I bought the replacement wire. You can get them on Etsy for like 150 bucks, but I have a $6,000 Glowforge Pro that I paid 500 bucks for and spent like 140 bucks for a repair kit. So definitely look into your different options and what's out there. Glowforge seems to be very big. One big thing about Glowforge, if you do go with that, they have a subscription model for their software. software. There is a free option that you can use, but it is very limited. You can't save things like I've got this one saved for airlift panels, so I can just go in. You don't have access to all of the free stuff that they have on their marketplace, and some of the settings are a little bit harder to work with. It can be worked with. I know people that use the free model and they don't have any issues, but it's definitely designed for a subscription base. I think I pay $200 a year right now for mine, but that is something to consider if you do go with the Glowforge. I think a lot of the money that they make is in the subscription model versus the BMO is really cool because it is free software. So you buy the laser and you own it. Keeping that in mind, depending on what direction you're going, if you are looking to do laser engraving for glass projector lenses, you may want to consider going with something like a BMO versus what the Glowforge offers. But in this case, the Glowforge is going to be perfect for acrylic work, so I'm going to go with that. Now we're going to zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to select this image, and I'm just going to move it right over top of our last cut. So you can see where we cut out 2 parts here already on this plate, and we're going to go ahead and cut here. Now the acrylic that I am using is 50/50 acrylic. I'll have a link to this stuff in the description as well. It's pretty common stuff that you can get on Amazon. In the past, I had actually got it ordered through my local hardware store as well. So you have a few different options on how you can go about getting it. But what I like to do is I like to take this stuff and I will actually spray paint it with a primer and top coat months in advance, and that way it's ready to go. I've got a bunch of plates that are already painted and they're ready to go. This one's a little bit scuffed up, so we're just having some fun with it here. So it's not one that I would finalize everything. It's not the smoothest paint job and everything, but you know, it's a good one that I use for scrap stuff, for stuff like this that I'm not going to sell, but you can dial in the laser and see how everything's going with it. But in general, yeah, that's the way I go. I get the plates. You definitely want a primer, and you're going to want a decent color top coat, so something of pretty good quality. Rattle cans are fine. You just don't want to go with the cheapest of the cheap. A big thing with these when I am painting them is I make sure that I hold them up in the light so that I can ensure that no light is passing through. If you do a cheap layer of paint, or if you don't use a good quality primer, then you're going to have a lot of light seeping through, and that's not going to be great for your end result panels. You want all of that design to pop. So you're going to not want to really rush that paint job. Go ahead and lay down quite a few layers. Double check that in the light. Like I said, I'll hold the panel up to the light and I'll look to see if any light is shining through, and if it is, then I know I need a little bit more. The primer is the main part of that. Obviously, it's going to block more light, and then your top coat, you just want to make sure it's nice and uniform without any runs. So I do a bunch of plates, and I did cut them different sizes. That is one thing about the Glowforge. It is a much bigger machine, so it can cut a bigger plate. So in this case, it's a very small plate. It's like 12 by 8 or something like that, and it's the perfect size for my BMO, which is a little bit smaller. But when it comes to the Glowforge, it can cut anything from like 20 inches wide to infinity long, because it actually has a bypass system where you can actually slide this stuff through the cutter, move it forward, start the next cut. You can effectively cut anything 10 foot long if you want, depending on the space that you're using and where you have it set up. But in this case, I did go with the 12 by 8, cut them down to size, painted them, and that is what I'm going to be using here. Once I got everything set up, all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hit print up in the top corner here, and it's going to do a scan of the bed again, and then the machine itself is a button on there, and I'm going to hit that button and it's going to start cutting. Then I'll bring it back over here and show you guys how it looks. Alright, so we got it cut. I pulled it out of the panel and wiped it off a little bit, got all the dirt out, but here it is lit up with the airlift kit. As you see, the definition is pretty good. I mean, honestly, it does a really good job, the laser removing like that. I really like that it kind of lights up the sides of the panel because it's laser cut, and you can see the detail is pretty darn good. There it is, not lit up. And once again, this is just a scrap panel. I got a little bit scratched up, so it's not something I could sell, but gives you an idea of the laser cutter itself and how it can do its thing. Now, what if you don't have a good vector image? Maybe somebody sends you a custom logo, or they send you something that you unfortunately don't have access to a vector format of that image. One thing that you can actually do is use AI, so something like ChatGPT. So we could take an image, something like this one, where it has a lot more detail to it. You couldn't just laser etch that, so it's not quite ideal, but maybe that's the image that somebody sends you. So what you can do, you can use a tool like ChatGPT, which currently is free, and you can go into it and say something like, I need to create a vinyl decal for this photo, can you help? Then you go ahead and put your photo in there and hit send. Now, I did have to prompt it a few different times to get the result that I wanted, and I find that this is kind of hit or miss. You got to think of it like this. It's almost like you're talking to a person of sorts, and it's not a person. It's not like, doesn't fully understand. Like, I should just be able to say, I want to turn this into a vinyl, and then it spits out an image like you see on the screen here. But as you scroll back, you'll see, and I didn't bother you guys with having to watch this painful process. I've done this before, and it's spit out a perfect image the first time, but sometimes you got to do a little bit more prompting to get closer to it. But like in this case here, we started with that image. That was the first thing it spit out, and it, you know, it gives you a full line of things, and you can request different things, and then it spit this one out, which, you know, closer, but not quite, and then that, which was like, oh, way out in left field, not right. Then it did that. That was not going to work, and now we finally have this design here, which is not far from the original design, but much better for laser etching. And you can go even further than that. I was able to go back in and ask it to add a little bit more detail, and it spit out this image. So as you can see, we took it a little bit further, and the AI was able to add in a little bit more detail, and you could go even further than that by prompting it. So what's really cool here is that you can kind of like tailor these images to what you want. So you can go from a photo like our original here and get this image from it strictly using ChatGPT. So it's definitely a cool option if you don't really have any vector options or anything that you can grab. You can go about it this way. And as you can see, a little bit of prompting, a little bit back and forth, it was able to spit it out for me. There's not much else I have to do. So then you can take that PNG, take it back into your Inkscape, and create that vector again, just the same that we did. You got a nice outline, everything looks good. One thing I will say about AI that you do want to keep in mind is that if you were to, let's say, try to do something that would be copyrighted, something like a Mario character or something, you put it in there, it's going to know what it is, and it's going to spit it out and say, yeah, no, we can't do this. So, you know, there's definitely limits to it. Once again, I don't recommend that you do copyrighted material because of the, you know, potential issues that you might run into with that. But if you do, and you know, many builders do, I have myself, just keep that in mind. AI is not going to be able to help you with that kind of photo. You're going to pretty much have to do it yourself manually. So that's pretty much it. So that gives you an idea of basic vector creation and being able to use really cool designs on acrylic work, backlight them with LEDs, and elevate your builds just a little bit more. It's a nice way to justify a laser cutter in your lineup, being able to implement it into builds and into different art projects and things that you might do. For the airlift plates, it's kind of necessary. It's going to be really difficult to work around that without having a laser cutter. And the ability to create these custom designs is pretty cool, and I did find that, you know, over the years I sold quite a few of the airlift kits, and quite a few of them were custom ordered, so they were one-of-one designs, and this was a way that I was able to do it cost effectively because it's a pretty quick process all in all. Once again, I will have links in the description for this video of a lot of the stuff that I mentioned. Inkscape is great software to have. Photoshop is something that I'll use sometimes if I have to clean up a photo. If I have a photo and AI is not an option, and it's close but it needs a little bit of work, you can use Photoshop to try to clean it up a little bit, and there's tons of tutorials out there on how to go about something like that. But I still go back to Inkscape to actually create the vector itself. It just does such a really good job of that bitmap trace. It has just been my go-to because of how simple it is to actually create that vector. And then with that vector, you can pump it into many different things. In this case, we're using it for laser software, but you can actually pump those vectors into things like Tinkercad or Fusion 360 for 3D design as well. So the possibilities are just about endless when it comes to this kind of stuff. Vectors are basically these files that can be exploded up exponentially without losing detail. So that's why the vectors are preferred formats, that SVG format, when it comes to things like CAD design. So a laser cutter, any kind of CNC, A vinyl cutter takes SVGs. 3D printers can take SVGs, but generally, because it's a 3D model, you're going to want to do a little bit more work than just taking an SVG. But you can absolutely take a vector file, load it up into a 3D printer, hit print, and it'll spit something out. It may not look real good because of the definition and because of the lack of supports, but it's a really good way to start. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos. Like I said, I will try to do one going into detail on actual acrylic design for a headlight or something more unique. And make sure you check out nextlevelneo.com for any of your LED lighting needs. Thanks.